Qwik 1.0 is out, and to celebrate, we are going to build this cool voting application that allows you to vote for like best bar in town. It's pretty interesting. It uses authentication to tell who you are. It uses Prisma to connect to a local SQLite database. It uses Tailwind for all the styling. And of course, it uses Qwik. So what is Qwik and why is it interesting? Qwik is a web application framework similar to next.js and React, but it takes a fundamentally different architectural approach to the relationship between the client and the server. And that allows it to do hydration very differently than what next.js does, for example. And it gives Qwik that signature quickness. So we'll see just how quick it is as we build out our app. Let's get right into it. So to start off, I'm going to do pm create Qwik, and I'm going to use the latest version for that. That's going to be 1.0. And we'll call this Qwik voting. And we'll say that we want a basic app that includes Qwik City, which is the router component that fits on top of Qwik. Qwik is the Vue framework. Qwik City would be, I guess, the analog for next.js. So we'll use that. And we want to install dependencies. And yes, we'll make it a new Git repository, and that Git repository will be available to you on GitHub for free in a link in the description right down below. All right, now we've got our VS Code launched with our Qwik voting. Let's go and bring up the terminal and fire it up. Okay, so there you go. Looks like a good start. Let's go take a look over at the source code and see what's up. So we have a source directory, as you'd expect. We have a public directory that has any kind of public assets in it. And within source, we're going to have our routes as well as components. And so as we look into something like the home page, you're going to see stuff that looks an awful lot like React. You're going to have a lot of JSX in there, and you're also going to be able to declare components. So there are a couple of integrations that I want to start with right out of the box. So let's go over to our terminal and add those. The first integration is with Prisma. We're going to want to store data. So we're going to do npm run and then Qwik. And then we're going to say that we want to add an integration. And in this case, the integration that we want to add is Prisma. Prisma is a database ORM layer that can work with all different types of SQL-style databases. Out of the box, it uses SQLite, but you could use Postgres or MySQL or whatever you want. So much like Astro, it kind of gives you a sense of what it's going to modify in this case. It's going to modify the package JSON, it's going to add some files, and it's going to do some npm scripts, and we'll say, yep, that looks great. All right, so now we have Prisma installed in our app. We also want to install Tailwind for styling. And again, we're going to say that that looks fine. Now we do get an error here. I haven't found this to be much of an issue, but I do a pm-i at this point just to make sure that everything is installed. And now finally, because we only want one person, one vote on each one of these questions, we're going to bring in an authentication library that's going to allow us to use GitHub for authentication and see who you are. To do that, we're going to add the auth integration. And it gives you this little extra line here about adding optimized deps to your Vite config. So let's go do that. So just bring in the auth core, optimize deps. That just makes sure, I guess, that the auth core isn't optimized away. Okay, one more thing I wanted to add before we start building out our application is I want to add OpenAI. And the reason I want to do that is that we have a snarky response for when you vote. It's actually surprisingly fun. I put this in the first version, and it's so much fun. I just kind of want to keep it around, and it's always fun to see how easy it is to integrate something like ChatGPT. So let's go and bring in OpenAI. Okay, now that we've got that done, I think the next thing to do would be to set up our environment, because there are some things that the system needs from the environment in order to work. One is the GitHub ID and GitHub secret. You would get these by creating an OAuth integration on your GitHub account. And then there's also the auth secret, which is just some random string that you come up with. So in this project, I'm going to put an env example file. And that's going to show you where to put all of that data. What you want to do is rename this to .env locally. And then fill in all of the values here, the GitHub ID, the GitHub secret, the auth secret, and the OpenAPI key, if you have one. If you don't have one, it's just going to say thank you for your vote. Otherwise, it's going to give you that snarky response. So I'm going to go and do that, but I don't want you to see any of those values, so I'm going to kind of blank that out. Okay, so now let's start building out our app. Now, the first thing we want to do is take out a lot of this index, and we'll say we have a quick voting app. And the first thing I want to do is build out the header. That's going to be at the top of the page, and it's going to have the sign in and sign out button. So let's go and add that. So what we're going to do is we're going to define a component, and then that component has a bunch of hooks in it. Those hooks involve getting the current session, so use auth session, and that's all exported from that route plugin auth TS file. So that's over here. We use the server auth integration that we got from Builder.io. And that gives us back our auth session, auth sign in, and auth sign out. So that's what we're doing over here is we're bringing those in and we're getting signals from those. Now there's a lot of hoopla about signals. A couple months ago, Qwik, like Solid, is built primarily on signals. And I guess too, Angular with RX, there's a bunch of different frameworks that are using signals nowadays, but they are baked into the core of Qwik. So these are all signals, and if you want to get the value of a signal, then you use something like session.value, and that gives you the value of that signal at that point. And in this case, we're going to get the user off that, and if they have that, then we're going to say that we're going to give them the sign out button. And if they don't have that, we're going to give them the sign in button. And then, very cool, we've got this form here. So this is another thing that's baked into Qwik City is simple HTML forms that invoke server actions. Now, these are built-in actions that come out of the auth plugin. We're actually going to go and build some server actions of our own later. So now that we have a header, let's go bring that in and invoke it. Okay, looks like I have a sign in button now. Now we do have the original header and all of that from the layout. So I think actually where I want to put this sign in button is over in the layout, which is right down here. Aha, this is bringing in some header and footer and styles. Let's go and remove those because we don't want to keep the out of the box ones. And then we want to bring in our new header. So we'll take it out of the landing page, which is index, and put it into the shared layout. Here's also another interesting thing about Qwik. Qwik uses a slots-based layout system. In fact, a named slots-based layout system. If you're familiar with Vue, it would be something similar to that. This is in contrast to what React would do, for example, with children. In this case, you just define where do you want the children to go, and it automatically handles that for you. So when it comes to our layout, we want our children within this main tag. Let's hit save, see it again. And there we go. We got our sign in up here. Let's see if it actually works. Oh, sign in via GitHub. Sure, why not? So now we have a sign out button, which I think means that we have a session. So let's go and check that out to see if we have it by using that auth session hook. So we'll go and grab the hooks from the header, take it over into our index, and we'll get our session, and we'll format an email. Now let's check it out. And yes, it has my email. Cool. Okay, good. So now we've integrated authorization just like that. Next thing we want to do is set up a database so that we can actually store the categories of questions, the answers, the votes, all of that. Let's go over to the Prisma directory and then take a look at what we have. So we have this schema file, and that's got our database provider, which we'll just use SQLite. No issue there. But we'll change out this model to suit us a little bit better. So we're going to remove user. And so now we have category, which is going to have categories of questions like restaurants, bars, breakfast spots. Then we'll have questions like best local bar versus best brew pub. And then we'll have the different answers to those questions, like which one is the best brew pub. And finally, we'll have the votes. And the votes are going to integrate the email that I just got from the auth with the question and answer. And then that will give us what you voted on. All right, let's save that out, and then let's update our Prisma. So to do that, we're going to do a bunch of Prisma commands, starting with migrate dev, which is going to set up our first migration. So we'll call this the initial migration. And now that appears to look good. Next thing we want to do is generate the TypeScript. So to do that, we're going to use generate. That's going to generate all the TypeScript types for us that correspond to the tables that we just created, like question, answer, and so on. And now at this point, we should be able to bring up the studio and actually see what's in the database. All right, well, now it looks like we have the schema, but we don't actually have any data. So we need to seed the database with some example data. So let's go build that out. To do that, we create in the Prisma directory a new file called seed.ts. That's going to bring in our Prisma client. And in there, we already have a list of categories. The categories are restaurants, bars, and breakfast spots. And then within each one of those is an array of questions. Who has the best Mexican food? Who has the best Thai food? And so on. And then down in main, we are going to go through each one of those and create it. For example, we're going to start off by creating the category. We're going to use upsert for that. What that's going to do is create it if it's not there already. Otherwise, it's going to update it. Then once we have our category, we're going to go through and add each one of the questions, then each one of the answers within those questions. If you are a Prisma fan, you might ask why I'm not using create many, which is an option. Unfortunately, that only works on Postgres. It doesn't work on SQLite, so we individually add each one of the answers. And then we do a little bit of fun here. We add in synthetic votes to make it look like there's been some action in this voting system already. And once we've got those votes kind of created synthetically, then we go and add all those votes by just creating them, again, using Prisma and its cool database agnostic ORM. And then finally, we just go and launch that main as part of the seed. So now we need to go and actually use this. So let's go over and go into our package.json. Then anywhere you want, you can add in a Prisma key. And within that, you're going to add seed. And that seed is going to run TS node, which is something we need to install. And then we're going to give it some compiler options because it needs to be a common JS module. And then we're going to tell it to seed with that seed data file that we got. So let's go and add TS node. And then to see if this works, we are going to do a migration reset. All data will be lost. Well, there was no data, so we don't care. So yes, make it happen. Okay, now that that's done, we'll bring up the studio and see if we've actually added our data. All right, looks like we've got a bunch of answers. We can go in there and see what the answers look like. We can go and see what all the votes look like. Okay, all right, looks like we're good to go. Now, one thing we're missing, if we look over at the seeds file, we can see that there's images in there for restaurants and bars. Those should go in public, and so we're going to add in those. There's a bar image, breakfast image, yummy looking pancakes, and a restaurant image. So these are going to look really nice on the homepage. So let's get that going. Let's start building out our homepage. If you recall, that's the index.ts file. So one of the things we want to do on the homepage is show cards for each one of the categories. So we need to get the categories. So in order to do that, we want to use during server-side rendering a route loader. So let's go bring in the route loading functionality. So a route loader allows you to asynchronously go off and get some data and create essentially a hook that when you use it in the component, it's going to have that data ready to go either on the server or on the client. So let's go and paste in this use categories, and that's going to give us our data. So we're going to have use categories, and it's going to give us back our categories by doing a find many on category. Now we're going to be using this Prisma client a lot. So I'm going to go and make a shared library folder. And within there, I'm going to have a Prisma client file, which will just bring in the Prisma client and then return a new Prisma client so that if I use it in a bunch of places, it's always just going to use the same Prisma client. So let's go bring that into our index. And now this looks good. We've got our use category, so now we can use it down in our component. So to use it, we just simply use categories. It's that easy. Honestly, when it comes to this kind of SSR route loading, this is probably the easiest that I've seen. Of course, we don't need auth session anymore, and now we just need to format the categories. So I'm going to replace our existing JSX with a format that's going to iterate through each one of the categories, just like you would in something like React, and then have those categories as links to /categories and use a card to show off that category. So let's hit save and see what it looks like. Okay, not bad, but it doesn't have all of the nice glassy effect that we had before, and that's because the glassy effect comes from Daisy UI. Now, Daisy UI is a component library that fits on top of Tailwind, and it's pretty easy to integrate, so let's integrate it now and get those really nice looking cards. So to do that, I'm going to do pnpm add daisy UI. We only need it in development mode since it's Tailwind. And then to integrate it, we just go over to our Tailwind configuration and add it to our list of plugins. Okay, now there are a few more additional CSS tweaks that I want to make. First off, I want to remove pretty much anything that's not just the stock Tailwind. That just gets us back to basic Tailwind. And then over here in the root, which has basically our HTML tag, I want to add a theme because Daisy UI supports themes. And the theme I want to use is Dracula. All right, that's looking really good. Now, one of the other things I want to do is have a navigation menu on the side so that people can just jump between the categories if they don't want to go to the homepage to get between the categories. So let's use the layout to give ourselves a nice 2-column layout with the navigation on the left-hand side and then the content on the right-hand side. So over in our layout, because we're going to use those categories, we again want to use the Prisma client. And we want to replace this existing use server time loader, which we no longer need, with use categories. So now we'll use that just like we did before by just invoking use categories and we'll get back our categories. It's just so easy. Now under the header inside of main, where we initially just had the slot, we're going to go and bring in the left and right columns. So we're going to have a 2080 column layout with a little gap in between. And then in the first column, we're going to have our nav. So we're going to have home, each of the categories. And then in the right-hand side, we're just going to have the slot for the content. Now, of course, we don't have link here, so we need to bring in link from Qwik City. Now, link, as opposed to just putting an anchor tag in, is going to give you that really slick spa-style navigation, much like you get from something like Next or Remix. All right, wow, that's looking really slick. So if I go over to something like bars, then I'm going to get a 404 because that page doesn't exist yet. We'll get there. So let's go back and let's style this up a little bit so that we know what page we're on by looking at the existing location and then highlighting the nav item for that location. To get the location, all we need to do is bring in another hook, use location, and that tells us what our current path is. And then we invoke it down here. That gives us our location wherever we are. Now let's go and create some styling for the nav item in both the normal and the active mode. So I'm just going to use 2 constants for that. Nav item is going to be the base nav item, and then nav item active is going to be nav item plus kind of an active stuff. To make it like a black text on a gray background is going to make it pop more. All right, now how do we use this? Well, let's go over to, for example, home, and we'll bring in a class. And we'll say that if the location path name is /, then we'll use the active styling. Otherwise, we'll just use the standard styling. Let's see how that looks. Hey, that looks really good. Okay. And then for each category, we'll do the same kind of thing. So we'll look to see if the path name matches the route that it would be going to. And if it is, then it uses the active. Otherwise, it uses the regular. All right, this is looking really good. Okay. All right, so now it's time to get to voting. So we're going to go and build out these category pages. So we need to first declare a route for categories. Unsurprisingly, we do that by creating a new route folder called categories. And then within that folder, we create another folder with brackets category ID. So that's going to give us the ID. So category ID, if it's 1, is going to be 1, 2 is going to be 2, and so on and so forth. And then within there, I'm going to create a new file called index.tsx. And that's going to be the component that actually handles the request. So the first thing we're going to want to do is get the questions for this category. So I'll bring in my route loader for use questions. And this route loader is going to look at category ID, get that back as an integer. And then it's going to find the category by just doing a where clause using Prisma. After that, it's going to find all of the questions, and then it's also going to compile all the votes. But let's make sure that we get all these red squigglies out first. To do that, we need to bring in our route loader, of course, our Prisma client, and then finally, we need to bring in get votes. So get votes is actually going to go and do all of the work to get the votes, and we're going to have that in 2 places because when you vote, we want to dynamically update those votes. So having a nice little function like that is going to help us with both the route handler here, but also the server action, which we're going to invoke when the person does a vote. And now getVotes is an asynchronous function that launches a Prisma group by. Now group by is going to do a SQL group by to group the votes so that it's all flattened by answers and questions and count all of those up. And then it's going to turn that into an array of question ID, answer ID, and count. And we'll call that a vote tally. And since we're going to use vote tally in a few locations, I'm going to create a centralized types file in source that's just going to have vote tally as an exported type, and then we'll bring that in. And where do we get this question type? Well, we get that from Prisma. And that's automatically generated when we do the Prisma generate to create the TypeScript types for us. All right, looks good. So we got our votes. We've got our questions. Now let's go and format that up into an actual page. To do that, we are going to use the component function coming out of Qwik. And then we bring that in by just bringing that in from Qwik. All right, now to use that, let's go bring in our format. Now we're going to iterate through all those questions, and with each question, we are going to list out the question name itself, and then use a nested component that shows all of the answers. Because the answer functionality is a little bit complex, it's going to go off and fire a server action, so it's good to actually have that in its own component that we'll call answers. Okay, so let's go create our answers component. So answers is going to take the question, the answers, the vote tallies, so you can put up a current tally of all the votes. And then it's just going to format that using some tailwind, but it's also going to do some vote tallying right inside the component itself, inside of that map. So it's going to find the current votes for this particular answer, and then it's going to find the total votes for all of the answers, and then it's going to use a progress bar to show off votes versus total votes and give you a percentage for each answer about how many they got. So let's try this out. Let's go bring this over into our index, in our components. All right, so it looks like it's not happy with vote tallies. So what is vote tallies? Well, vote tallies is a signal. And currently it's just an array, right? Votes right here comes from our get questions. So it's just an array of the votes. If we look at our types, it's just going to be a vote tally array. That's not a signal though. So we need to convert it into a signal. So to do that, I'm going to use useComputed. And the reason that I'm going to use useComputed is because when you vote, we're going to have some updated tallies. So I want useComputed to actually decide between the initial tally of votes that we got from the SSR versus the updated votes that we got from the server action that we run when we click on vote. So I'm going to bring in useComputed. And for the time being, I'm just going to say that the vote tallies are the question value votes, or if that doesn't exist, then just an empty array. And we can use that as our signal now. And it looks like that's now happy. So let's go back to the page and see what happens. Hey! Ooh, that's looking really good. Okay, so now we've got our best Mexican food. If we click on bars, we can see how smooth the transition is between these. This is really good. So now we want to put some sort of voting functionality in here, and we only want people to be able to vote if they're signed in. So we need to pass two answers. One, are you signed in or not? And then two, if you are signed in, then when you click on vote, call me back with that vote and I'll go off and send it to the server. So let's go in and implement that functionality. So where we're going to implement that is over in our component directory inside of answers. And we're going to have two new properties. One is whether we are logged in or not, and that's just going to be a Boolean. And then we're going to have onVote, $. And so when you have a click handler, in this case like onVote, which we're going to have when we click on the vote button, you use $for that to show that it is an event handler. And then you use this prop function type that you get from Qwik to indicate that this is a function property, a callback property. Now, I admit that this feels a little bit worse to me than React, which takes just a simple function in this spot, but it's okay. What's actually happening underneath the hood here is really interesting. This is actually part of the resumability aspect of Qwik, and it's a concession to that particular mechanism. So I'm okay with that. So now down here in this div, which is the second column, we want to conditionally put in a vote button if we are logged in. So there we go. We're going to say if we're logged in, then we have a button, and that button is going to do an on vote. Of course, we haven't brought those in the props. So let's bring that in. And now that seems happy. All right, so let's go back over to our index and start using that. So we're now missing those properties. So our logged in is going to be pretty easy. It's whether we have basically a user on the session. So you just need to bring in that use session hook. And then we need to invoke that. All right, but now we need some sort of on vote. So let's go and just create a simple on vote that does a console log. And we're going to go and wrap this vote handler in an async function using this $. And the $, is again a concession to Qwik's resumability. So we'll bring that in. So now we have on vote, and we will go and attach that to our on vote. And let's see what we see. Okay, all right, looking pretty good. So when I click this, what's going to happen? And we can see over here in the console that we got a vote. Awesome. So now what we can do is we can invoke a server action. And a server action is just a really nice way of having the client fire off a message to the server and get back some data. So we're going to use that to implement our voting. So I'm going to close that up. And we're going to implement up at the top here a vote, a server action, so server $, and we get that from Qwik City, called vote. And vote is an async function. It takes the email, the question ID, and answer ID, and then it deletes my vote if I had one already for that question. It then creates the vote, and then it gets the details on this particular question, all of the questions on this particular category, and those are all used when we call the getVotes function so that we can then go as well as the answer. And the questions are used during getVotes to tally it all up. And then the question and answer are actually used by the create thank you. So that create thank you is that really fun OpenAI integration that creates a snarky response for when we do a vote. So let's go and implement on create thank you so we can do that snarky AI bit. All right, so over here in lib, I'm going to create a new file called OpenAI. And then in there, I'm going to bring in our implementation. So we're going to bring in the configuration and OpenAPI API from OpenAI. And we're just going to go and create an OpenAI object if we have an OpenAI API key. So if you don't have one, that's okay. You're not going to go and build out that's fine. And then we're going to create this create thank you note. And if we do have OpenAI, then we're going to ask for a completion. And all you got to do is say create completion. It's an async command. You give it a max number of tokens. I guess that would be words. Give it a little bit of temperature. How spicy do we want the response? Which model to use? In this case, DaVinci. And then we give it a prompt. So we're going to give us a short, snarky thank you to a person registering a vote in a poll. And then we give it the question as well as the answer. Then we're going to take the topmost choice, in this case, choice 0, and replace any quotes in it and send that back. And that's going to be our completion. And if we don't have OpenAI, we're just going to say thank you for voting. So there we go. There's our create thank you note. So we'll bring that in from lib OpenAI, create thank you. So now we have this server action that we want to use. So how do we use it? Well, we go back down to our event handler down here on vote. So we call vote and we get back a vote response. And all we need to do to invoke that server action is just literally call that function. We give it the email that we have, the question, and the answer. So let's try this. So I'll go back over here. I'm going to add a vote to El Buen Sazon. And now if I hit refresh, we can see that we got 22 votes. Of course, I don't want to hit refresh. So I want to go and take the new vote tally data that came out of there as well as our snarky response and do something with that. So we need to create some local signals that will hold the response and allow us to use it. So to do that, we're going to go and bring in use signal. Now this is the Qwik equivalent of basically a use state in React. And we're going to use that down in our component to hold the response. That would be the snarky response, the thank you, as well as the updated votes. So now to set that value, all you literally have to do is just set it. So you say value equals and then whatever you want that value to be. Now to get that snarky response going, what we want to use is a Daisy UI toast. So we're going to say if we have a response value, then we're going to launch a toast and say that we have this cool snarky response. And then for the votes, well, we already had this use computed. So we're just going to reuse that and say that if we have updated votes, then prefer those over the SSR votes, which we prefer over an empty array. And I'll put it down here just to make it flow a little bit better. Let's hit save. Now let's see. I will go and add one to Sam Thai Cuisine. All right, we got 25 votes. So that was updated on the fly. And awesome. We got a nice little snarky response. But I kind of want the toast to be up in the corner up here. So let's go and make some small changes there. And now the next time I make a vote, fantastic. Now it's up in the top corner. Great. So now I like this toast, but I want it to disappear after 3 seconds. It's kind of just lingering there, right? So let's go and use a visible task to remove this toast after about 3 seconds. So we're going to bring in use visible task. And this is a task, so it is something that we want to do at some point, triggered by something. But we only want it to be on the clients, thus the use visible task. So let's go down and bring it into our component. And what we want to say is we're going to track the response value. And if this response value changes, and there is a response value, then we're going to go and set an interval of 3 seconds. And once that interval pops, then we're going to go and set the response value to undefined. And then at the end, we're going to clean it up. So let's hit save. Now let's see. Spice Club. There it is. 3 seconds later, gone. Awesome. Now this server action thing that we're using when we click on that vote button, which is firing off a request to the server and getting back some data and updating the display, is cool, but it is only one way of communicating with your Qwik server. Another way is to use a traditional form. Now, so far we've been using that for our sign in and sign out functionality. Let's go and see if we can use that for an admin page where we can go and create a new category. So go back over to our routes. I'll create another folder, call it admin. And into there, I'll create an index.tsx file. And they'll bring in a form-based UI for creating a category, and I'll walk you through that. So some of this is what we've seen before, component and Prisma. What we haven't seen before is route action, and that's what's going to handle the form post, as well as a wrapping of Zod, which is going to do some data checking for us, as well as the form component, which we use to wrap the form. And we use all of that in our create category. So this is a route action. It takes some data. We use that data to create a category. Pretty simple. And then additionally, we can create this Zod invocation. Now what this is doing is creating a Zod data verifier. It's going to verify all of the data coming in off of this create category route action. So now let's go and use that create category down here in our component. We'll go and do a little bit of formatting for our page. And then here's the fun part. We got our form, and then the action of that form is just create category. We give our input, nicely bordered and whatnot, and then we have a submit button called create. And then when we get back the result, we're going to get back a value from create category. Create category is itself a signal, and that's going to be whatever has come out of this return. So in this case, we're going to say, well, if we got any kind of value at all, then our category was created successfully. So let's try this. Let's go over to our browser and then go to the admin route. We can type in a new category name like pool halls, hit create, and now we've got pool halls as a new category. How cool is that? So when it comes to building the dynamic behavior of your site, you get the choice. You can make a route action using form just like this, or you can use a server action, whichever you want. Now I'm going to do a little bit more cleanup of this project before I post it, just to remove some of the boilerplate that's in there. But otherwise, what you see here is exactly what you're going to get. And it's just a nice little app that allows you to go and play around with some of the core features of Qwik. Of course, a link to that repo is in the description right down below, as always. All right, well, I hope this lightning tour of some of the coolest parts of Qwik gets you interested in trying out this platform. now in its 1.0 release, which is so exciting. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to put those in the comment section right down below. And if you like the video, be sure to do me a favor and hit that like button. Or if you really like the video, hit that subscribe button and click on that bell and you'll be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.